back to the fam, y'all. It is so nice to say that again. We've been running it back a few times. My name is Parker Johnson. To my right, I've got Pamphinette Buisa, the one and only. I've got Dr. Lisa Gunderson to my left, the should-be leader of us all. We need you.
We do need you.
We need you. I want to do a check-in before I introduce the topic. So please, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I feel good. The weather is freezing, but I'm warm. You know, I got y'all. It's good. It's good to be back.
And how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Honestly, I missed this. It's been it's been a while, and I think coming together, we're able, to be the fam and talk about the good and the bad and all the other random things. So, yeah.
It's a good way to put it. I don't know if I told y'all, but I was on the street walking to work, and somebody stopped and was like, "The fam."
No. What?
That was very good, by the way.
That's awesome.
The fam. I was like, "What?" Yeah. So.
I mean, but
That's
typically
awesome.
that is also, might I add, a Parker Johnson experience.
not
This
gonna
guy
do
cannot walk into a coffee shop without people being like,
Okay.
"Parker, hold my baby."
Okay.
So that also could just be your lived experience.
I did tell you I was at Dodd's.
Dog's Furniture.
Yeah, and Gordy was there, and he said he watched us.
Wild.
Shout out to Dog, man.
Yeah.
I grew up with Dog.
And we've
see
had that
Dog
experience.
Wow.
So, yeah.
You never know who's watching.
You never know with hopefully what's happening next and getting that voice out in different places.
Totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
gonna be
I'm
awesome.
doing well as one can do,
Yeah.
Yes.
given everything, you know. Hey, we're here now.
We're living in times.
We're living in times, but we move,
Yes.
as we like to say.
Absolutely.
Tonight's topic, we're thinking about leadership.
Yeah.
So what makes good leadership? What is a good leader to you? And I'll leave that question out, and maybe one of y'all can take a stab at it. What does good leadership mean for you?
I think these days I've been thinking of good leadership as leading by example.
That's good.
I think in the rugby world and things like that, a lot of the times, if you're in a leadership group or you're kind of given a certain title, a lot of the times there's ways and opportunities to actually just lead by how you're showing up on time, doing your extras, doing all the little things. And also I think a big thing is also caring about the younger athletes coming in, and also just the next generation more generally as well. So I think leading by example, oftentimes I've seen you may not have the title of, okay, you're the leader or you have a title associated to it, but I think it's a lot of the times it's doing the things when no one is watching, and doing the things that you need to be doing.
And from what I understand, in your world, you are often a support. People come to you.
Yeah.
So there has to be a lot of modeling.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
That's pressure.
Yeah, and I think for me the first time it kind of hit me, it was after Tokyo 2021. So a lot of the older players had left and retired. And I remember it was our first tournament back. We were in Dubai and we're in the changing room. We just lost a game and I'm sad and I'm upset. And as I was in my feels, I'm watching one of the newer players watch me. And I was like, oh, I actually can't be pouting and doing all this stuff because they're watching me. They're watching how I'm acting and they're watching my behavior. So it was in that moment I called one of my teammates and I'm like, the ones that retired, I was like, man, I don't know how you guys did it. Oh my goodness, because that's what we did. And I never necessarily thought of myself in that same way. And then when I was noticing that, I'm like, well, yeah, of course it makes sense because this is their first time. I've been here. So they are watching. They are paying attention, whether you see it or not, they are. So that kind of kickstarted a lot of that of hey, whether you're being watched or not, just stay consistent.
Consistency, yeah. What about you, Dr. G?
I find it an interesting question because there's so many different ways you can lead.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think a lot of times people think of maybe natural leaders in the sense of the chief of police or the chief of the fire department
Yeah.
or a principal or a superintendent,
Yes.
right? Like there's certain roles that people have that ascribe leadership to them. But I find that oftentimes there's within community leaders, you know, and one of the things I find interesting is when people self-proclaim that they're a leader.
No, we know
and
those
you
ones.
see that a lot, like you see that a lot in politics, for
Yeah.
example, or when people have bios, you know, I'm a community leader. And the first thing I think about is, are you?
Yeah.
Like,
We
what
don't know
would
you.
make you, right, a community leader? You know, how, and people just kind of take that and go,
Yeah.
okay, you're a community leader.
Yeah.
But are you?
Yeah.
Like, what? And so that's how I start thinking about leadership. What would make you define, you know, who is a community leader?
Yeah.
And do leaders really self-proclaim themselves? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You
Or
gotta say it.
is, right? Like, how does that actually work? And so for me, I'm in two spaces trying to understand that piece of that kind of self-proclamation of leadership, but then also, and to your point, who are leaders if when they are by themselves, how they act?
Yeah.
But also kind of, I've seen leaders kind of shift where, depending on the tides, right? And you have a set of core values. And when things are rough and those values are being tested, and then you shift to whatever, however the winds shift.
Yeah.
To me, that's not leadership, right? And even though they may have a title of leader.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious about this idea of leadership, and if we put things like experience behind that, age behind that, because I know leaders who are 10, right?
That's true.
And so I have a lot of thoughts around what is a leader. And later when we come back, I'll speak more to what I think that looks like. But those are just some of the things that kind of pop up for me when thinking about leadership.
I like what you said about a leader can be 10. It's so true.
Yeah.
It's so
Absolutely.
true.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, some of these kids should be running the show, I swear.
What do you think?
I think a few things, but what comes up for me is how you respond to tough times, how a leader responds to other people's mistakes. I really believe you can say the hard things kindly. I always say that when I'm facilitating or whatever. So how are you responding to other people's mistakes? And is this a teachable moment? And I think so much of conflict or tension, there's always a teachable moment.
Yeah.
So are you responding, am I gonna respond with my frustration, or am I gonna respond in a way where I can reset and say, no, this is a moment where I could potentially educate or try and figure out how that person learns.
Yeah.
So that to me is really helpful. Like Dr. G is a good example of somebody who, if you give an idea, like I've never seen you so skillfully say no.
I've seen it.
It is.
I have seen it.
It
Do you
is-
remember that time we were in that?
Yeah.
It was that meeting. It
was a meeting,
It
yeah.
was a meeting in Langford, and someone kept piping
Oh,
up.
yes.
And Dr. G just
By the end of it, we
hear it, and I'm looking at Parker. I'm like, did you see that?
just the nicest no.
And then just
Here you go.
reverted, facilitated, and I'm like, that was
Wow.
art.
Yeah, it is an
Art.
art. It is an art, and it's patience.
Yes.
And it's knowing how to read the room, knowing how to read people,
But also guiding the conversation when it needs to be moved.
and caring for someone's humanity as well. So you're not out here to embarrass somebody.
Yeah.
It's like, no, let's just move this way.
So let me ask you all something about that, because it's funny, because when you're in it, you don't feel it, right? Maybe that's
Sure.
part of it, right?
Yeah.
You don't, but I like the idea of it being an art. Where a lot of us are into sport. What about, I've seen leadership done in a different way, and this is going to be kind of directly to your point about the way people may yell at somebody, or, my son had a coach who had this thing where he would just be like, okay, gentlemen, let's play some basketball, please. You know, let's,
Okay.
do you know?
I know those ones.
Versus the ones that crack a board, which I've seen at a third grade basketball where this parent just went like, I was like, dang. And I was like, third grade. I was like, I will never allow my child to be near that person, right? But some people talk about this idea of showing that kind of force or anger, almost kind of directly opposite some of the things you talked about. So I'm throwing that to you all. Is it possible to be a leader and act that way? We just had the Super Bowl. People have seen different expressions and, you know, some people like seeing people get upset because then it shows the coach shows that, and then people are like, oh, the coach has my back. Where the opposite can be true as well, where you take that too far, then you get a technical, then you get kicked out of the game,
Then it's out of control.
and then what is that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you all think about that. Is that really possible to?
Well, I think you gave the example of someone cracking a
Yep.
clipboard or something. I think controlling your emotions is modeling, you're sharing how you process things. I think you can be respectfully loud. You know what I mean? I think you can be respectfully loud. You don't have to take it to a level where
Respectfully loud. That's so good.
I like that.
that's what my thoughts. What do you?
I think it all depends on the relationship and like the investment into the relationship before the anger comes out.
Like
That's
from what?
interesting.
As if I was a
Okay.
coach, like I've had coaches, I've also seen coaches that will flip out on the sidelines. But they have invested as much time into the individual athletes, knowing what they need and everything. And also knowing, it's hard to say kind of like as a blanketed statement because I've seen, for example, my sister's team basketball play for Carleton. Their head coach is like really expressive and shouting all the things, but like the team loves her. But that works for their team culture because she also invests so much in pushing her athletes and being like, you know, push yourself. I'm not going to baby you. And like that's kind of the dynamic that she has because I think also she's pinpointed the points that the athletes are trying to work on and pushes them there and will like kind of get into their head. I used to have a coach and it would anger me. He'd be like, be an athlete. Like I'm like running lines and I'm jogging. He's like, can you be an athlete, please? And he knew that would get my buttons, but I knew that him saying that, as much as it bothered me, shout out to you, Matt Greer,
Wow.
was that it pushed me, but I was like, you know, I am then it was like the mind games that I think would still be there, but because he also knew where I was trying to go. I would tell him, I want to play for Team Canada. So like when I'm jogging and doing the things, that was his way of pushing me. So I think it really depends on the relationship.
The line that you said is that the coaches are expressive.
Yes.
And they show, and I think that's critical for a leader.
Yeah.
You can't just be always so, oh, that ref just did a horrific call. You know, like that, it's not showing life. But there is that line between us being expressive, and I'm going to bring this to us as Black folk, that line between being expressive and then being, you know, angry. And it's, for us, it's always the, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's the difference. When you're getting teed up every game, to me, that's not you being a leader.
No.
Like you have your players looking up at you and stuff like that. When you get teed up enough that you get kicked out of a game, what is that about, right? Like, and with the same token, I know leaders who are very much not necessarily expressive, but the problem as well is they're also then afraid to, like you said, call out a mistake, for example. A leader needs to be able to do that. So what good is when you see all this chaos and you as a leader can't step up and say,
You're right.
You're doing something wrong. You know, I don't have to shout at you about, but I do have to call it out.
Yeah.
We can adjust this. We can change.
Yes.
I'm noticing this. Whatever it may be.
But you have leaders who won't do that because they don't want to stir
Or
the pot.
an additional not receiving feedback.
That is a big one.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
How are you supposed to evolve as a person or as a leader if you can't accept feedback?
Yep.
That's a huge one.
And I don't. We can stay on that part for a second, but I also want to mention that something came up is how a leader responds under pressure or in different rooms, maybe outside of sport, politically or in the workplace,
Yep.
and you're being treated a certain way. How do you respond to stigma? How do you respond to
Yes.
to being dehumanized? How do you respond? How do you still carry yourself? There's some leaders that really carry themselves in such, I don't know how to, with grace.
Yes.
And I'm looking like, you got a lot of patience. Cause
Yeah.
Because I would have been done with that. I would have,
Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of minoritized groups.
Yeah.
Women in certain spaces.
That's a good
If
point,
you
yeah.
look young,
Yeah.
where you're not supposed to be, who are you to tell me anything? If you look old,
Yeah.
Who are you to tell me about anything,
yeah.
right? Like the biases and so forth.
bias,
Yes,
yeah.
that's huge in leadership because I think we are raised through our media, social media, et cetera, on what leaders are supposed to look like, especially in certain realms.
You're right.
There was a clip at work. It was to as an example of showcase an example of this bias, and it was just an animation of someone walking into like a dealership and saying, "Hey, I'd like to speak to the regional manager. Where is he?"
Yeah. Something as simple as
And
that.
the
I
lady's
see.
like, "Oh, I'm here. How
Yeah.
can I help you?" And it's quick.
Quick, yeah.
Yeah.
We just had in the Super Bowl the first African American woman, I think, who won in the Super Bowl, like a coach. So she's like one of the coaches.
Oh, offensive or defensive coach
I'm not sure who she is. I was like, oh,
For
I'm
Philly.
gonna for Philly, and they showed her
That's cool.
face, and I was like, oh, that's so cool.
That's amazing.
Didn't even register
Yeah.
like what that looks like, but it's whether it's in firefighting.
Yeah.
We in California right now, there's the chief firefighter. She's female. And a lot of people are like, when you look at this woman's background, you're like, heck, I mean, just think about what it takes
Yeah.
to be her.
Totally.
Right.
Yet, when you get in that leadership position, you're still questioned,
Totally.
Yeah.
right? Because of your race or your
Every step
gender.
of the
Everything.
way.
It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
all of a sudden, it's about you having to prove yourself,
Always.
and nobody questions the fact that everybody else before you looked a certain way. And that's not questionable, but you're the one that had to get through all of that,
Yeah.
but you're the one that may have the problem,
Yeah.
Surely you're not as qualified.
right?
After everything you've been through, I don't know.
Yeah.
This is the world we're living in. It's loud
Very,
and it's fascinating.
very. But what is it that makes people hear that and not go through the process we went through, which is, why would you even question that? Of course, think about
Yeah.
all she had to go through.
Yeah.
And instead defaulted into, yeah, maybe she did just get,
Yeah.
maybe he did, it's like, oh, maybe he did just, he was just given it.
Yeah.
Because the people who run the company want the company to be destroyed. So they just gave it to,
Yeah.
like what is that thought process that doesn't make you think, wow, this person is probably exceptional?
I think you're speaking to something deeper.
Yeah.
The core of it that requires another 26 minutes. Because I know it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm glad that we're talking about this, about what makes good leadership, because there are so many things that you have to navigate depending on what your background
Yeah.
is, what field you're in.
Yes, yes.
And it seems like leaders, you're just up against the biases and then the public
Yeah.
perception. And there's an artist, local artist, Kemi, shout out to Kemi. She had a dance piece around resisting these kind of oppressive
Yeah.
systems as a black woman. And forgive me if I'm butchering this description. I'm not an artiste. I'm not. But it was this very controlled, deliberate, consistent movement every day that you have to do. It's just this slow dance you have to do, because if you're too loud,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
if you're
Exactly.
too quiet,
Yep.
if you present a
Exactly.
certain way, so it's just this deliberate,
Yeah.
and to move like that is so much energy.
It is.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And that's why so many leaders, depending on their fields, again,
Yeah.
where they're at, are mentally unwell in many
Yeah.
times. You know, one of the things that I do is I hold space once a month, for example, for organization where all their leaders come to just,
Yeah.
because of what you said, they have to hold everything up while everybody else is like,
'Cause-
so
yeah.
where do you go then?
For sure.
Right? And I think that's critical for us to think about how we care for our leaders. You know, people love what leaders can give, but how do we care for them? Like, if you think you have a great leader, let them know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
say something in community. Once in a while, tell that community person, you know, I'm so grateful you're in our community, right? Like, it's in many ways, kind of a thankless job, depending on which industry
For
you're
sure.
in. Other industries really show their leaders certain credit,
Yeah.
maybe a bit too much in some ways. But again, it's that idea of it is such an intentional thing to be a leader. You have to be so thoughtful,
So thoughtful, patient,
patient,
open.
yes,
Consistent.
consistent.
And I think that consistency can, that fatigue that can breed if it's not cared for. So it's like
yeah.
making space to just, show that I see you, that appreciation.
Yeah.
Because I think, it is thankless a lot of the times.
You have to be flexible.
Yeah.
I think that's important. I think you have to be open-minded. And you know my favorite saying, don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out. Right?
I've never heard that.
Oh,
That is
one of
such
my
a wild visual. Wow.
but it's that idea. Yes, we need to be open, but you also got to make sure, right, that you stick with what you value.
For sure.
And really work in that value and work in that space. And that can be very tempting for leaders. Like that can be challenging, I think, for leaders. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this now. I'm thinking about, I mean, obviously, you know, Pam and I were always coming to you. You're a sounding board and mentor. Have been for years.
Yes.
And oftentimes, we're just like, you see what she did?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. What? Because you'll say things very plainly, and you'll say those hard things, those difficult things, with a lot of integrity, but also still allows that person to take that feedback or that idea or whatever and ponder. It's not like I'm shutting this down.
Yeah.
And we're not learning from this or anything. It's like, no, I'm giving this back to you, and please ponder because it's important.
I've seen you all do similar things, though. I've been able to have the pleasure of watching you all, right? And I see the way that you facilitate, you know, table talk in a masterful way, I think. And the same thing for you when you were talking with, you know, back when we were at the university and watching what you do, and then you think about the students that you're
Yeah,
you're
the
both
students,
mentors for
yeah.
students, young people, as am I. And I think part of being a good leader, which we haven't mentioned yet, is being part of a team.
You're right.
And that, I think, is a critical piece, is that oftentimes you talk about leaders, and the way we've been doing it is kind of in a solo fashion, but it is really a team approach.
You're right.
And I think that's part of what's great, because if you can do that, then you can rely on your leader and your leaders for what they're good at. So my thing is being able to go into a space, you know, and take something difficult, like you said, and trying to translate it, but making people feel like they can talk to me. But there's other people who that's not their thing. Like, I know some leaders are like, never speak. Like
if
there's something.
never speak to me as a leader. Never?
No, like say you're a leader,
Yeah.
and you just don't have a certain skill set. Like
Yeah.
you can't
Right.
Oh, don't
criticism, or you can, you know, there's just maybe your tone. There's just something off.
Yeah.
It's like don't talk to tag team. You know, have somebody
see.
else. And so that's why I think I like leadership models that are more team-based.
Yeah.
Because one person
Collaboration.
doesn't have all the skills.
Yeah.
But you could have a certain skill set that I'm not very good at, right? Like I'm not very good at necessarily standing up and telling people certain things, like maybe very directly, like the way that it needs to be done. Sometimes I take more of a subtle approach maybe, but I know somebody who is excellent at that. And there are times with, depending on the situation, I'm like, all you, because that's what's needed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just wonder, and this is more for you all, younger generation, this idea of doing more of a collaborative leadership style as opposed to my generation and older, which has always been so kind of, I feel like solo.
Top down.
Yes.
Hierarchical.
Individual. It's about me. You know, what kind of leader can you be?
Yeah.
What do you all think? Do you think with this more kind of diverse, inclusive society that we need more of a team leadership approach?
Yeah, I think that one of the most powerful things on the planet is a phone book. That collaboration, those relationships, I would not be where I am without those relationships. And it's knowing what's in my toolbox and what I'm missing.
Yes.
And I'm missing a lot of things, a lot. So,
See, and that's a sign of a good leader.
Yeah.
I know the things that I'm missing where, you know, there's some things you can teach yourself, but there's also just some things
It's
that,
just not.
you want to do math? Count me out.
right? Well, you all have seen me with social media, so.
Yeah.
I think you're great at it, personally. I like the socials. I like them.
So as I saw the helicopter, I'm getting the helicopter. We're getting there. Any final sentiments around leadership that come up? Any flowers you'd want to give as well?
Well, the only thing I really want to mention was kind of bringing to attention, like that's a decolonial method of leadership, is that it's not held in one singular person. It can be, other people can show up, it can stand up. And I think that team-like or team models of leadership, I think, is what is a very, I don't know, can lead to a very robust and good team, as when that leadership knows their lane and allows for someone to shine also.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think like a good leader consists of someone that knows their strengths but also their weaknesses and allows for others to, you know, shine when they can. Yeah.
I just echo what I said at the beginning. I think how you navigate tough times and how you deal with conflict and tension within a team speaks volumes about who you are as a person. How you treat people when they're down and how you treat people when you're down. Because we lash out. I know, you know, we can be frustrated and it can kind of affect other people. So I think those are important.
And I think it's all that stuff that you all said. And in addition, I think it's having some humility, like really being humble and also not being afraid to show your strengths and work in that space. But like you said, also knowing that it's not just about you. It's actually being a leader is a privilege and it's an honor to be able to take things around you and people's trust. And, you know, people are, in a sense, kind of counting on you to stand up. And the most important thing is standing up for what you believe in, which may mean that you may lose that leadership space or it's just going to look different. Yeah.
That's a good note to end on. Dr. G, do you wanna close us out? Trademark.
Sure. I just want to say it's so wonderful to be back with you all. And I want to say to all of you out there, think about yourself as a leader. We all have that ability and capability to be a leader. No matter your age, no matter your background, you can definitely be able to help be a change maker in many different ways. And so we want to let you know that you have our support if you think about the type of leader that you want to be. Hopefully you heard what we said and that makes sense to you. So good to be back. From our fam to yours. We'll see you next time. Bye.